Hi guys, welcome back to the cereal box mystery, the Boxcar Children. So, we are on chapter 7. So, go get some Legos or something to color because we're going to start chapter 7. Let's get started. Okay, you got your listening ears on? Okay. Too many rings. I don't believe this, Mrs. McGregor said. What? Asked Henry, coming into the kitchen the next morning, followed by Benny, Jessie, Violet, and Watch. Take a look outside the back door, Mrs. McGregor said. Some animal got into the garbage and turned it over last night. Some dog, probably. She glanced at Watch. Benny said, Watch stayed with me last night. Mrs. McGregor smiled. I know Watch would never do such a thing, she said. We'll clean it up, said Henry. The Aldens went outside. As they began to pick up the garbage, Violet said, That's strange. What? Jessie asked. There are chicken bones in the garbage, Violet said. If a dog or any other animal had turned over the can, wouldn't the bones be eaten? Yes, Henry said. And then he said, You know, it does look like a person did this, not a dog. Maybe they were going through the garbage. It was true. The contents of the can were scattered all over the yard, but spread out neatly. You're right, Henry, Jessie exclaimed. Someone did go through our garbage last night. Watch growled last night while I was asleep. I woke up, but he stopped growling. He must have heard the garbage can being turned over, Benny said. But what was the person looking for? Violet asked. I don't know, Violet, Henry answered. It's a mystery, that's for sure. Just as they finished cleaning up the mess, Sue Lee rode up on her bicycle. Hey, she said. I got here as soon as I could. Are you ready to go follow Mr. Darden? Yes. And we'd better hurry, Jessie agreed. The Aldens got on their bicycles and rode to David Darden's small, tidy house on the edge of town. There they spotted some tall bushes to hide behind. Soon Mr. Darden came out. He got in his car and drove towards Greenfield. The Aldens pedaled after him as fast as they could. On Main Street, Mr. Darden got out and parked his car near the town square. He walked briskly down the street. The Aldens walked after him. When he stopped, they stopped and pretended to be looking in the store windows. They followed Mr. Darden to the jewelry store. Violet gasped and grabbed Jessie's arm. You don't think he's planning another robbery, do you? I don't think so, but maybe he is, Jessie answered. She looked up and down the street, half expecting to see a man with a hat pulled low and wearing a tan raincoat. But she saw no one like that. Should we call the police? Benny asked. Let's just keep an eye on him for now, Jessie said. They walked past the window of the jewelry store. They could see Mr. Darden in the back, bent over a glass counter. All around the walls of jewelry, all around the walls of the jewelry store, rings and necklaces and bracelets glittered and gleamed. We should go in and see what he's up to, Violet whispered, as if she were afraid Mr. Darden could hear her. We can't all go in, Henry said, but I think some of us should. You and I should go in, Violet said. We could pretend we're looking for a gift for Grandfather's birthday. Yes, and we'll wait out here to stop him if something happens, said Benny. Violet and Jessie walked into the jewelry store. They stood at the counter near Mr. Darden. Look at that pocket watch, Jessie said. Maybe Grandfather would like one of those. But he already has a pocket watch, Violet said. Jessie nudged her. Oh, said Violet. Yes, the pocket watches are nice. Watching Mr. Darden and one of those jewelers out of the corner of her eye, Jessie in the jeweler's hand, Mr. Darden had a small box. Mr. Darden opened it. What was inside? Jessie couldn't see. With a little gasp, Violet grabbed Jessie's arm. What? What is it? Jessie asked. I thought I saw something go by the window, Violet said. Who? Said Jessie. The man in the tan raincoat, Violet said. Maybe he's about to come in and rob the place. They waited tensely as Mr. Darden closed the box and put it in his pocket. He thanked the jeweler and walked out. Both Violet and Jessie let out a sigh of relief. I guess he wasn't going to rob the store after all, Jessie said, forgetting to lower her voice. The jeweler heard her and gave her a funny look, but Jessie didn't notice as she and Violet hurried out the door to join the others. There goes Mr. Darden, Henry said. Come on. They followed Mr. Darden down the street to the town square. He stopped once and peered into a store window, smoothing his hair, adjusting his tie. What's he doing? Benny asked. He's using the window as a mirror, Jessie said. When he's finished, Mr. Darden patted his pocket. He smiled and walked towards the bench by the flower bed. They saw a young woman stand up and smile at Mr. Darden. Then the couple sat down on the bench and began to talk. Suddenly, Mr. Darden took out the small box from his pocket. He got down on one knee and opened the box and handed it to the woman. She put her hands up to her cheeks and she looked very surprised and happy. That must be Mr. Darden's girlfriend, Violet said. It's so romantic. What if the ring he is giving her is the stolen ring? Jessie asked. Come on, Henry said, and led the way towards the bench. The young woman was holding up her hand, admiring the ring. Mr. Darden had gotten up to sit next to her again. Hi, Benny said. Mr. Darden looked up, startled. You again? He said. Is that the ring you were shopping for at Antique Treasures? Jessie asked bluntly. No, Mr. Darden said, and then he smiled. I bought the ring at a different store. What kind of ring is it? Benny asked. Is it a ruby? The young woman laughed. Oh no, she said. It's an emerald. Jessie glanced down at the green ring on her own finger. Like this, she said. The young woman held out her hand. It was on a slender gold band with a small yellow stone in the center. That's not an emerald, Jessie said. Emeralds are green. But Mr. Darden was shaking his head. Not all emeralds. They come in different colors. So do rubies and diamonds and precious gems. You can even find black diamonds. The woman said, I think this is the most beautiful emerald in the world. Mr. Darden said, I wanted to ask you yesterday when I made lunch for you, Janie, but I was too nervous and this ring wasn't ready yet. Now I know why you weren't hungry, Janie said. You were at Mr. Darden's yesterday, Violet asked Janie. She nodded, her gaze still on her engagement ring. We're engaged to be married now. Mr. Darden stared at the children. I'm sorry if I seemed distracted when you came to visit, but I didn't want Janie to hear you talking about the ring. I was afraid it would spoil the surprise. Was that why you told Mr. Bellows you didn't want your name in the newspaper? Jessie asked. Yes. I was afraid Janie might see it and somehow guess what I was planning, Mr. Darden said. Janie smiled at Mr. Darden. Mr. Darden smiled back. We have to go, Jessie said. Congratulations! The newly engaged couple didn't even look at the Aldens as they left. Goodbye, said Mr. Darden. As they walked their bikes away, Jessie said, that explains why Mr. Darden was acting so strangely. With a laugh, Henry said, it sure does. If Mr. Darden didn't help Mr. Mapp, then maybe Mrs. Smits did, Violet said. Jessie reached into her pocket and took out, whoops, did I miss it? A piece of paper with the names and addresses of Mr. Darden and Mrs. Smits on them. She said, Mrs. Smits didn't leave an address, only a phone number. We can call her from the phone booth on the corner then, Henry said. And this is them going to the corner for their telephone call. Have you guys seen a phone booth before? They're definitely few and far between now. Let's see. When they called, a voice said, Karate Center. Surprised, Henry hesitantly said, May I please speak to Mrs. Tori Smits? She's not available right now, the voice said. May I take a message? I'm Henry Alden. We wanted to talk to her for a few minutes. Mrs. Smith should be free in just about 15 minutes, the receptionist said. Could we have your address? Henry asked. We could come by. He wrote down the address and hung up the phone. The Aldens pedaled to the karate center, which wasn't far from Main Street. Inside, a young man behind a battered desk was typing something onto a small computer. On a shelf behind him was a row of trophies. Excuse me, Jessie said. We called a few minutes ago. We'd like to speak to Mrs. Smith. The young man looked up and pointed. She's in the studio, he said. You can sit on that bench and watch through the glass if you'd like. She'll be out soon. Did you win all those trophies? Benny asked. Those? The young man glanced over his shoulder. Not yet. I still have a lot to learn. No, those trophies belong to our instructors. They've all earned their black belts, which means they're the best. Oh, Benny said. He sat down next to the others. They watched as Tori Smith, in loose white pants and a white coat, wearing a black belt, showed students how to kick and punch the block. Sometimes the students tried to knock her down, but no matter how hard they tried, she always won. She's very good, Jessie said admiringly. Oh yes, the young man said, practically unbeatable. A few minutes later, they heard Mrs. Smith say, Okay, that's it. Everyone bowed, and then the students filed out the door to the back of the studio where the words locker rooms were on the door. The young man got up, tapped on the glass, and motioned to Mrs. Smith. She walked towards him and then opened the door and stepped into the reception area. You have some visitors, the receptionist said. The Aldens stood up and said hello, Henry said as he wanted to introduce everybody. Mrs. Smith looked surprised, but she held up her hand. I remember you, she said. You don't need to introduce yourselves, and I bet I can solve a mystery. What? Asked Benny. What mystery? The mystery of why you're here. She curled her lips into a small smile. You're playing detective, right? You are looking for the missing jewelry. And the thief, said Benny. He wasn't sure, but he thought Mrs. Smith might be teasing him and the other children. He stared at her hard. We just wondered if you could remember anything else about what happened. Anything that might be helpful, Violet said. I told the police everything I know, Mrs. Smith said. It all happened so fast. So even though you grabbed the thief just outside the door, you didn't see his face, Henry suggested. He pushed me away so hard I nearly fell. I wasn't able to hold on to him, much less see what he looked like, Mrs. Smith replied firmly. Now, if that's all, I have another class to teach. Good luck to you. She turned and walked away. The Aldens left feeling discouraged. She wasn't very friendly, Violet said, but I guess that doesn't mean she's hiding anything. Besides, she tried to keep the thief from getting away. That was very brave, Jessie said. She paused, then added, unless she was just pretending to keep people from being suspicious. Ooh, good question. But she could have taken the jewelry after the thief left, Henry pointed out. Mr. Darden was still in the shop. Maybe they were all three working together, Jessie said. Maybe, said Henry, but I don't think so. I don't think so either, said Violet. Mr. Darden didn't have anything to do with it. Maybe the thief dropped the jewelry in some special place and whoever was helping him picked it up afterwards, Jessie said. That could have happened, Henry said, but Mr. Smith walked away in the opposite direction from where the thief had gone. Violet pointed out, and Mr. Darden stayed on Main Street looking in shop windows. We still have two suspects, Henry said. Who? Asked Benny. Mr. Bellows, Henry began. But why would Mr. Bellows steal his own jewelry from himself? Benny cried. I don't know, Benny, but I think we should go talk to him and find out, Henry said. Who's the other suspect, Jessie asked. Dr. Kroll, said Henry. Of course, Jessie said. She knew Mr. Bellows had the necklace. Why? She could have sold the Why? She could have sold the necklace to Mr. Bellows and then stolen it back. Mr. Bellows could even have helped her, Henry said. Come on, let's go talk to Mr. Bellows right now. See you guys in chapter 8.